This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Donny Dust, and I just got to tell you guys right from the beginning, this is certainly one of my favorite interviews that I've done this year, but this might be one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done. So we really hit it off outside the podcast before we started recording. Excuse me. It was just one of those things where I had a feeling even as he was answering the first question, I was like, I think we're going to dig into some great stuff here, but it really didn't go the way that I thought it would. And with most of my interviews, I really like when that's actually what ends up happening. But this guy has a reputation for being a professional caveman. So I haven't had one of those on the show before, but he is an expert survivalist, primitive skills expert, and he's a retired United States Marine. So he owns and operates Paleo Tracks Survival. So that's Colorado's premier survival and kind of wilderness self-reliance school. So he's done that for a couple of decades, and he's got a couple of decades worth of outdoor survival and primitive living experience. He's authored 3 books, including his latest book, Wild Wisdom. And so here it is right here. It's an absolutely gorgeous book. And man, it's just very, very impressive. So you may be familiar with him because he was a contestant on Alone season 6, and that was in the Arctic. Also, he was co-host of a reality show called Mud, Sweat, and Beards. But let's talk about this interview today. So in the interview, I start out with, hey, you were a Marine, how'd you end up being a Marine? But that got us into about a half-hour discussion about the current state of the United States military, the differences between being a peacekeeping force and a force that's trying to end a conflict or end a war. We talk about his deployments, kind of the difference between, someone with combat experience versus somebody with non-combat experience. And, he served in Iraq for 2 of his deployments. And, looking back on the GWAT, looking back on Iraq, looking back on Afghanistan, I really enjoyed his perspective there. But also we got into just the state of the military overall. And I'm looking down at my notes because we went through and, talked about a whole lot of different things. But one of the things in that discussion, he talked about God, country, core. And so we got into a discussion about his views on God, his views on spiritualism, his views on Jesus. And we had a really interesting connection there. And he actually thanked me for it off air after we were done, because he was like, yeah, I don't ever really get to talk about that. And I think it's interesting. And I put an interesting rock in his shoes. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep going through the interview so that you can get that. But then we got into how his personal motto became life is long after he had a heart attack in his late 30s, right? And so this was a life-changing moment for him. It caused him to reevaluate his life, kind of reevaluate the pace of life that he was living. But then how does he go from that to being a professional caveman? Like, how do you go from that to building a career around survivalism? But one of the interesting things about this, I was like, hey, give me a really sketchy survivalist story. And he told me about a time in Utah last summer where he almost died. It was super, super sketchy. But then I was like, hey, you got to tell us something that you've never told anybody. And so to his own embarrassment, he did tell us something that he was embarrassed to admit, but it was just kind of a funny thing. So you got to continue listening to hear that. But then towards the end, we got into a bunch of really kind of rapid fire survivalist questions. What are some of the biggest problems? Is it overestimating your survivor skills or not having any survival skills? What are some of the basic skills that you need to survive in the outdoors? What's the difference between surviving and thriving? What are some of the biggest misnomers and misconceptions that people have about survivalist stuff? But then towards the end, we got to the essential things that every single one of us needs to have in our vehicles and also on our person at all times and when we're in a nature scenario. So guys, again, I can't recommend this highly enough. I think this is going to be one of your favorites as well. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Donny Dust, I would give my normal welcome to the podcast speech, but I got to tell you, I got a bone to pick with you right from the beginning. Okay. And here it is. I have the best beard in these interviews, okay? Almost every interview I do, it's me. I am the captain now when it comes to the beards. But look at that thing. Like, what are you trying to do to me on my own show, Donny?
It's all genetics. It's all genetics. The Dust clan, the line, we are a hairy group of men. We all have beards. And they change in lengths. They change in color, but a little bit of deer fat keeps it going. No complaints.
Okay, very good. I will tell you that the beard at this length is already too long for my wife, but if I wasn't married or if I had more of a cave woman type wife, I would be tucking this thing into the front of my pants. And so, we kind of do what we can. But Donny, we got a lot of ground to cover and we already hit it off air. But The first thing I want to get into, because this is always just a curious thing for me. So I grew up in Lawton, Fort Sill. So I grew up around a lot of military.
Yeah.
I kind of live a little bit of a Spartan lifestyle. So people think that I served, but I'm very, very cautious about stolen valor. And so I never pretend like I served. I've never raised my right hand and said that I would defend this country from enemies, foreign and domestic, but you did. And you entered the United States Marine Corps. So for you, let's just start there. Why did you choose to serve? Why did you choose to go into the military, and why specifically the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of simple reasons and then more complex ones. For me, there wasn't a lot of family that had that lineage, that history of serving in the military. And I was one of those kids that spent more time outside and less time in the actual schoolhouse, if you know what I mean. I loved playing football. I loved wrestling. I loved, throwing javelin and track, but grades were not my thing. And, Uncle Sam, one day on a rainy day, kind of very cliche, I was going to visit my girlfriend. She wasn't there. It was raining, and the only light that was on was the Armed Forces recruiter. So I stopped in there. Army wasn't home. Navy wasn't home. Air Force was probably out to lunch, but the Marine Corps light was on. I walked in, and I was the easiest sell for the military. They were like, do you like hunting? Do you like fishing? Do you like being outside? I was like, yeah, all of those. You should join the Marine Corps. You should join the infantry. And, probably within 2 weeks, I signed all my papers, taken all the tests. I never got in trouble. I never was into drugs or alcohol or doing anything to that extreme. So it was very easy. And I found myself quickly at Parris Island, United States Marine Corps boot camp, the home of it. And it was kind of on the fling because I didn't want to go to college. I was playing football. It wasn't my thing. But the Marine Corps gave me direction. It gave me purpose. It gave me God, country, Corps. It gave me something, not that I was missing in my life, but it gave me a more focus into those sort of aspects. And it really set a foundation stone for me in the military as well as all of my time outside of the military.
Okay. And you've talked a lot before about kind of what the military did for you. And the thing is very, very few people percentage wise in terms of the population of the United States actually serve. It's the lowest percentage that we've ever had. And with our problems with recruiting, that percentage gets even lower and lower with each year that passes. But for you, and I'm not asking this to try to drive a wedge in the community, but there is a difference between a combat veteran and a non-combat veteran. Sure. And I don't say that to diminish anyone's service, because again, even if you never served outside the wire, you served a whole lot more than I did. And for so like I have a deep and abiding level of respect, even if you just served on post and you got other guys ready to go outside the wire, like I have a tremendous amount of value. But for you, you saw some kinetic situations, sure. Quite a few kinetic situations. So let's talk about some of your deployments. So what years were you in? Kind of where were you deployed? What were some of the mission sets that were in front of you?
Yeah, so I was in from 1999 to 2011. So I came in before 9/11. Yeah, when we were still training for that Vietnam, different sort of jungle warfare. The towers went down, and it was quick, fast, ready to go. And when those towers came down, I was at kind of a transition in my military career where I was teaching leaders in the Marine Corps. I was teaching squad leaders and helicopter rope suspension training. And I found myself kind of in this position where I needed to deploy. I needed to get outside and really, do the good fight that you've been training for so long. So I actually did a lat move into the counterintelligence, human intelligence field, where my job was to embed with indigenous people and run local area assets for intelligence, human intelligence, where the bombs were, where the HVIs were, where the caches and drugs and weapons were. And that put me in a lot of close contact with some very unique individuals, especially on the interrogation side of the house, because that was the other facet of that job. So I did 2 deployments to Iraq. That was 6 into 7 and then 8 into 9. And then I did a bunch of other counter intel deployments to Southeast Asia, to Zamboanga, Philippines, against the Abu Sayyaf group. The counter intel field is a very unique field. It's a small field, but our job is to deny, detect, and deceive terrorism, espionage, sabotage, and subversive sort of acts. So you can find yourself deployed independently in a kind of hostile environment, but the threat is minimal compared to like a kinetic environment like Iraq or Afghanistan. So my deployments into the Philippines was myself, my partner. We're working within a local area to establish assets, different human sources to support a variety of missions are going on. So you're in board shorts, flip flops, a t-shirt with a pistol down your pants and a backpack full of money trying to make connections and contacts. One facet of kinetics and combat and the things that you can see, because everyone in that sort of capacity looks friendly, but there could be some, nefarious individuals. You go to Iraq and that full kinetic operation, that full kinetic environment, when you're outside the wire, you're meeting with local assets on the ground, sometimes late at night, sometimes during the day. But it was one of those things, I kind of had this mentality that my job as a guy to deny, detect, and deceive the threats was that if 100 Marines landed on a plane and they landed in Iraq, my job was to ensure that 100 got back on that plane and flew back home to their loved ones. And that is that kind of trying time. So you have the physical kinetics of IEDs and suicide bombers and, snipers. And then you have the mental kinetics of ensuring that everyone gets home. That 18-year-old kid, that 19-year-old kid, or really young man who raised their right hand, said, I will support and defend. My job is to make sure that they got home. And it requires you to kind of lay in that kind of gray area. It's hard when you're interrogating a potential HVI or somebody you pucked or placed under control, and that guy has killed several service members. It's me and him sitting there having a discussion, having, a conversation where all I want to do is end him as he sits there. But the reality is I know he knows things. So I have to kind of battle my own personal kind of demons to say, all right, as much as I want this guy wiped off the face of this earth, I need to see what he knows, who he knows, why he knows it, and how I can use that to potentially save lives. So my deployments were spread between full-blown kinetic environments in Iraq and then a lot of sort of overt within the clandestine operations into southern Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. It was a bunch. So When 2011 came around, I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a husband because I was gone. My sons really didn't know who I was. I was just kind of in and out, high op tempo, and said, hey, I appreciate the scars. I appreciate the camaraderie. Thank you for letting me serve. But now I need to serve in a different capacity.
Okay, I appreciate all that detail. A question I have in terms of Iraq. And so obviously when we look back on the GWAT, there are a lot of strong opinions from those in the civic community and those that served about why we were even in Iraq to begin with. And then also Afghanistan and the pullout, and there's all this stuff. But looking back now, well, actually, considering your reaction to just then, I want to hear from you about looking back on Iraq. Do you regret being there? Do you feel like you were part of the, military industrial complex? And, do you feel good about what you did there? Because, there are villains in all of these different conflicts, but I don't think the guys that were, again, the guys that raised their hand and were said, hey, send me wherever you need to send me. Those guys aren't the villains, right? Those guys just did what they were told by superiors. But then you see Afghanistan and you see that the absolute nonsense of pulling out, the leaving behind of billions of dollars worth of arms that will be used and have already been used to kill Americans and to kill other allies of ours. You see the subjugation of the women in Afghanistan. You see, 100 years ago, you could go to Afghanistan as part of a, backpacking trip across Europe. And now it's like, you're never going to go to Kabul for anything. And so just kind of talk to me, I guess, Donnie, of the current state of the military as we look back on the GWAT, but also as we look towards the future.
Yeah, I think, as a young Marine, the opportunity to go to battle, to protect and to serve, I wasn't necessarily focused on the big picture because we have strategic level sort of informations and decisions and policymakers. And then we have that tactical level, that grunt down on the dirt. You have the ground truth on what's going on. And within that kind of construct, that tactical ground truth level, I am there to protect my fellow Marines and fellow service members and the human population that exists there that doesn't really know why this war is taking place, or some sort of nefarious organization is instituting rules, regulations, and cutting off heads and all these strict things. So at a very baseline grassroots level, I know that my purpose was to, just like a law enforcement officer, serve, protect, and absolutely get into the shit, part of my French, if it goes down that pathway. And only when you're out of that environment and you have a time to breathe, kind of lift your head up and say, what were we doing there? Do you catch those glimmers of what I would like to say, a different sort of truth? And as time has progressed, we quickly learned, and my perceptions have changed, that we were there for pretty much the wrong reasons. We were there part of that military industrial complex. I was there to serve my fellow Marines in that civilian population, but those decision makers and those key influencers at the top really didn't care about us, I guess you could say. We were the pawns in that chess game as they vied for power and money and oil and all these sort of strategic positions. And I think that's a common thing that takes place in a lot of wars and a lot of sort of environments. There's always an overarching kind of goal or influence to gain, to control, to have some sort of sway of power in an environment that you're not organically from. And I think Iraq was one of those things where I do believe as we withdrew, we left the necessary presence. There was a systematic, handover in certain ways, and you could see what right looks like to a certain degree. And then when you compare that to Afghanistan and the chaos and the lives and just everything that ensued afterwards, it's a slap in the face to every veteran that set foot on that piece of dirt, and just the chalks were pulled, and that was it. It was like how many lives were lost, how many battles were fought, and how many days were spent away from loved ones to just, here, why don't you take everything that we're leaving behind and go forth and carry on with the way you want to live. You know, I had a very unique opportunity to go to what's called a mirror image program, where I actually got to live as a terrorist. It was about 60, I was like right below 90 days, where I would pray 5 times a day. I learned to build bombs, do assassinations, kidnappings, all of the sort of things that your adversary would do. I went to an organization and a school with some other Marines and some SF and some SEALs to learn who your adversary is, how they think, and how they operate. And there's one message that I really took away from it. And it doesn't really matter if we win a battle or if we stay there for 10 years, eventually we will leave. And when we leave, we lose. That's the name of the game. So that's their home front. That's their turf. And one day we will leave Iraq. We will leave Afghanistan. We will leave any sort of place that we go. And when we do, we lose. And in the minds of those, adversaries, local sort of insurgent populations to higher level kind of national level insurgent organizations and threat groups, we will lose no matter what. So that kind of shapes your perception going forward, where if that is the message that's going to be portrayed, and you can clearly see that in Afghanistan, for me, I'm here to protect, make sure my guys come home, protect those populations, where hopefully that influence of kind of protecting and serving everyone can kind of carry forward into the future.
Okay, Donnie, we might just go a little bit long today because we have so much stuff to get into, which is, the stuff that you're doing today in your new book and all that type of stuff. But I want to kind of go through this thread just a little bit further. If not, just maybe just one more question.
For sure.
So if you look at the trajectory, and Jack Carr actually helped me kind of understand this, because it's like, back in the day, it was the Department of War. Now it's the Department of Defense. We go into World War I, World War II, and it's like, we're not going to keep the peace. We're going to like kill people and break stuff until we do that enough to where we actually win. But it seems like perhaps starting with Vietnam, we kind of lost our will to win. And it seems like with every conflict we get into, we try to see what the political price is going to be. And specifically, reading Jack Carr's book, another Simon & Schuster author, as you are, he talks about and targeted Beirut in Lebanon in 1983. You have Ronald Reagan and you have all these people that they sent the Marines in to kind of be a peacekeeping force in Lebanon. And just saying Marines and peacekeeping force in the same sentence is one of the silliest things that you could say, because you send the Marines in to kill people and break stuff like that. That's what the Marines are best at. And guess what? They don't need a big budget for that. And they certainly don't need, high speed gear and high speed, tents and things like that. Marines are just going to go out there and get it done. But it seems like we're hamstringing our military with these really restrictive rules of engagement. We're hamstringing them because we're not giving them the mission set that leads to success. It's a mission set that at best will lead to the prolonging of a conflict. And Donnie, as you just alluded to, when we do get out, there's going to be a vacuum. And when we create a vacuum, specifically in a place like the Middle East, there's not a whole lot of, options for people that aren't nefarious that are going to try to fill that vacuum.
Yeah.
So for you, when you look at the military and you look at kind of the state of it now, where we seem to be really worried about making sure we have very diverse, it seems like we want people to sign up for the military that have two mommies or that identify as LGBTQ or, those types of things. And we're not looking for those corn-fed farm boys that just want to get after it and protect the country and protect the homeland. So talk to me a little bit about kind of where we've drifted as a country and where we've kind of landed now.
Yeah, so I think there is a different climate in this country, but I will say this, rest assured, my 6'9" nephew, who's from Texas, a corn-fed, super intelligent guy, enlisted in the Marine Corps 6 months ago, and is right now training to serve in the capacity that we want. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some individuals that, as he's kind of alluded to me and kind of shared with me, like, was it like this when you were in? Did you come across these people that could just raise their hand and say, I don't want to do this? And I'm like, in my time, which was, when I went in 20 years ago, not so much. There was a longing. There was an answer to a lot of young men and women when we were going in the Corps. But times have changed. But we still have those hard chargers and those warriors that are wanting to serve, not because of a dollar or not because of anything, but they just have that longing and that calling to serve.
Amen.
And it's a different environment. Today's day and age is very much different. I mean, for a guy who makes primitive stone tools and teaches survival classes, I've got an iPhone and I'm trying to connect with a broader and larger audience through various ways, and writing books is one of them. But I think there's an adaptation to the current sort of environment. Those that are questionable in their practices and their beliefs and all this sort of nonsense that we see all around the world, they're not really in there. They're not going to make it all the way through. It's guys like my nephew who are monsters, who just love to serve, love that history, that are going to make their way through. You'll get those onesies and twosies, right. But I think that's a social kind of misperception of what's actually going into our military. It is harder to probably recruit after so many years of war and kinetics, but it still exists. And I think the important thing we have to remember between World War I and II is, what is MUTWA? So we have MUTWA, military operations other than war. We've only actually had a couple wars, World War I, World War II, and I believe the Korean War, that were full-blown conventional warfare sort of approaches.
Right.
Everything else has been a different type, an operation other than war. So counterinsurgency, counter drugs, counterterrorism. There's a counter to everything. Those are your MUTWAs. And in that MUTWA sort of world, there's a lot of kind of misunderstandings, as well as sort of the rules and the things that you can do underneath Geneva Convention and the laws and rules of land warfare, because typically those were written for a conventional war, but we're battling a high-tech, more complex, more spread out sort of nefarious group. And within that, we need to kind of readjust. We need to take a look at our adversary and say, if we're applying these old policies and methodologies to safeguard our troops and allow them to fight, because trust me, Marines, they want to fight. That's why they're there. We're trained to fight. All the other MOSs in the Corps serve the combat arms. But if we're not creating that ability for them to engage in the most logical and, kind of impactful way, we're really just tying one arm behind the back, saying, we're going to give you bare minimum stuff, but we're also going to handicap you. So if you are in some sort of kinetic, you have to fire a warning shot above the head, wave them down, do all these steps in order to negate that ultimate threat. But we need to adapt. We need to adapt to this sort of current climate place, especially now that we have a clear vision on what our adversaries have. Why? Because we gave it to them. All the stuff that's going to Ukraine, that's winding up in God knows whose hands, because it's easier to sell a gun than it is to employ it in those sort of places. More importantly, all the stuff and resources that were left in Afghanistan, some remain there, but that's easy money. That's easy buy. So now that we know the capabilities as well as the limitations of what our adversaries have, we need to train to that high-tech capacity. We need to train to be not only global thinkers and responders, but how can we actually anticipate these sort of things from taking place before we have another, 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, or pick your sort of chaotic event where an adversary gets the jump on us, if you will.
Donnie, I think I'm just going to, whatever you have booked after this, we're just going to push that. So whatever that person needs from you after our allotted, agreed upon 60 minutes, because I got more questions and we still haven't gotten to the point of the interview today. So you good with that? You good to be a little flexible in time?
Yeah, man. I'm Semper Gumby. I've got no.
Okay, very, very good. So earlier you talked about how, the core kind of taught you, God, country, core, and those types of things. And I think family's supposed to work in there somewhere. But for you, I haven't heard you talk about God or any type of relationship with, with the God of the universe, a creator God or things like that. I just haven't seen it. Perhaps you have in other places. So for you, I guess, where would you say that you land? Or were you saying that maybe in your upbringing, you didn't go to church, maybe no spiritual discussions? Because for me, I grew up in Oklahoma, and so you're Christian because you were born here. That's kind of how it works out. But, everyone's Bible has an inch of dust on it, and, you just go to church, a few times a year, and you don't really lead a gospel-centered life. You're just born on red clay, and so I guess that means you get in the club, right? But for you, kind of what was kind of your upbringing in the world of the spiritual, if you can use it broadly like that, and kind of where would you say that you land now?
Yeah, I think from a spiritual aspect, I am very spiritual in a lot of different ways. My upbringing, I was raised Catholic. My family, they are from Michigan, and my grandfather was a truck driver. My father started off in a shoe store and wound up running multiple companies. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and going to church on Sundays was part of our practice. And as I kind of got older and as I kind of started to ultimately kind of experience the world in different ways, I had a lot of questionings into faith, especially when I joined the military. Not so much of, declaring God, country, core, but from the things that I witnessed and that I saw, whether it was, people hiding behind a woman and shooting an AK between their legs, young kids being exploited for all sorts of things. And I truly started to question, if such a divine creator existed, why would these things take place? And I battled with that. Evil will exist, and this can be influences in all sorts of manners. But it really allowed me to kind of take some time and truly explore what it means to be spiritual. What does it mean to have a following within faith? And for me, I kind of came to the conclusion that faith is important. Faith is something that you need to have. It's faith in yourself. It's faith in the outside world. What that outside world, I mean, in that kind of divine capacity. And I do believe that there is that kind of divine entity that guides us. But I personally am still looking into and trying to discover those kind of nuances of what it is. I've read the Bible. I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read the Quran. I've read many religious texts to understand different perspectives into life. And I still kind of go back to that obviously the Bible and that kind of Catholic approach. That's how I was brought up. But for me, I'm still kind of in that journey. And I think when I come across people and I talk with them and I hear the reasonings behind their faith, their spirituality, and what it means to them, I find those points resonating in me. I'm like, we're the same. And have you come across these because of an acceptance of God and Jesus Christ and these various sort of beliefs? I have those in me, but I haven't been able to quite define them. I know they exist, and I see the moments when they do exist, from the birth of my sons to the love of my life to experiencing all that the world holds. And I think for me, I'm still kind of in that spiritual path, and it's never one of neglect. It's one of exploration. And I think that divine creator would say, one day when I walk through the pearly gates, thank you for putting the time, effort, and energy to truly understanding what your faith is. If it required your entire life to do so, you did it right. You just didn't accept. You just didn't say because someone told me. You went out and found it out yourself. It's the same way as the prophets and even Jesus went and discovered and educated and informed people, and they came upon those conclusions themselves. And I'm there. I mean, I do go to church at times, and it is a good feeling. I pray pretty routinely, and I can find that there are those connections there. I'm just looking to kind of define what that is, but it's hard to fit into a category where I might feel differently, if you know what I mean. But
no, I absolutely know what you mean. Yeah, the thing with categories is, especially with a guy like you with a personality, I'm assuming if you were to take the big five, you would be high in conscientiousness, but also high in openness, similar to me. And so you're deeply creative, but you also can get things done. And so what happens is when you're like that, you don't really like putting yourself into a category because, and so people will kind of default to saying, well, I'm spiritual. Well, demons are also spirits. And so you have to be more specific than that. And so the thing with faith is, when people use the word faith, especially if you're, which you have a sense of the divine, so I wouldn't put you in the militaristic agnostic or atheist camp, surely. But when you don't have a sense of the divine and someone uses the word faith, people just kind of roll their eyes because they're like, I don't have faith. I have evidence. I have proof. And the thing is we can't really prove anything. We can't technically prove that you and I are even talking right now because this could all just be a simulation, Donnie. Like this could all just be, we could all just be dancing to our DNA. I can't prove to you that I'm even using these words right now. But this would be the recommendation that I would give to you because you do seem like, even just in your answer, Donnie, to be an intellectually honest seeker. And so whenever I've had discussions with intellectually honest seekers throughout my life, the thing that I have them do is, because when you look at the world and you're like, oh my gosh, there's the Bible and there's the Book of Mormon and there's the Quran and there's Bhagavad Gita and there's all these different ancient writings from ancient Sumer and all these different areas. Okay, what do? I start with the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Because you could read the entire Bible, but guess what? If Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead, like if he didn't die on a Roman cross at the behest of the Jewish Sanhedrin, at the hands of the Romans, and put into a tomb and 3 days later rise from the grave and show himself to hundreds of people, and the people that were running away from him saying, no, I never knew the man, are now willing to die for what they saw, not what they believed, not what they had faith in, but for what they saw. If that is not real, if the evidence for the resurrection is absolutely faulty, then you can just dismiss the entire Bible or look at it as, hey, this is a book of fables. This is a book of, kind of like decent moral panderings, but it's not really real. And so that would be the thing that I would recommend to you. And that there are certainly some resources. There's, different things that people that have looked, even atheist scholars that have looked at, okay, how can we explain Christianity making it out of the first century when Rome, the most dominant hegemonic force of the time, did everything it could to stamp Christians out? How in the world did it survive? How are people becoming Christians in Iran right now, whenever there are no Christian missionaries there? Like, what does that look like? And so, if you're open to continuing that exploration, man, let's dig into the resurrection and see if it has any merit to it.
Yeah, I am. And I willingly and wantedly accept that resurrection and the evidence that has been proven. And there's a couple even Bible verses that, I like to go by. And one of them is, turn over a rock and you will find me. You will see me. And that resonates with me in kind of that natural aspect, because I think that is one of the places where I become the most spiritual, where I see the most evidence and the most connection to a divine power. It's witnessing it in a different capacity of watching animals, watching the landscape, watching all these things that exist.
For sure.
Some have changed over time, but there has been a root origin to them all. That is where that spiritual connection runs very, very deep. And I find it to be one of those places where it's almost like going to a church. It's yes, I'm not sitting in a pew and there's not a pastor or a preacher, speaking to me in that capacity,
right,
but someone is speaking, I guess you could say. And I sit there and I listen, and that listening could take an hour. It could take, 5 minutes, but it's the nuances that I catch out in the natural world. And then that I see in kind of my everyday pattern of life. Like when I see my kids wake up and when I get to experience time with my loved ones, that is a clear representation of something intervening. And like the evidence that you spoke of resurrection, without a doubt, it's written. There are hundreds of people have witnessed that.
That's
For me,
right.
it rolls into that experience of, I know that to be true. And it could be my own ego or my own perception saying, what else can I find that really builds upon that initial kind of evidence, if you will? And I do see it. And the category, what you would want to call it, how you would want to call it, you could call it a lot of different things, but I know it exists within me. And I'm sure at one point, it will be revealed in a higher light, in a higher capacity, without the aid of narcotics or anything like that. It's going to hit me like
right.
a ton of bricks. And I'll be like, man, this is what I needed. This is what I knew existed, but now it's come to me in a different light. And then it's carrying forward from there.
Hey guys, real quick. If you're anything like me, you are constantly on the lookout for high quality products that are actually made here in America by American hands. The problem is that a lot of American companies have outsourced their labor overseas, so it's an American company, but it's supporting people that don't live here. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that prioritizes America, American workers, and making all of their materials here in this country. That's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and they are focused on getting as much manufacturing back to the United States as they can possibly do. What do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet, and these are the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they're stretchy and awesome. They also make amazing hunting gear, and I know you guys love your Kuiu and your Sitka, but those companies use overseas labor, and they don't do that to help you guys out. They do that to increase their profit margins. Origin also makes boots and work boots, and yes, that does include steel-toe boots. And in the fall of last year, they launched a line of everyday clothing. Their Versa pants are their everyday pants, and they are just especially phenomenal. They also make other outdoor clothes and workout clothes, and they're launching new apparel stuff all the time. If you haven't already, you need to check them out and support a company that supports America and America's workers. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Hey, man, I just love the openness that you have in your personality, and to you and to the people listening right now. There's a couple of very heady but very deep resources that I point people to. So there's a book called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. It is a tome that people really go towards. So I can send these to you later. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, and Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And so I'll actually send you a couple. I'll send you some copies of that. And so Evidence That Demands a Verdict. This is a book. I read it wrong. I read it like it was a book that you read from beginning to end. No, this is a reference book. And so you flip through the table of contents and you go like, okay, I want to dig into that. And then you dig into it because it's very, very heady. But the one rock that I'll put in your shoe before we move on to the crap that we're actually supposed to talk about today.
You're good, man.
What you seem to describe, albeit accidentally, is the difference between faith that and faith in. And so someone like Jordan Peterson recently, he was kind of, I forget the guy, but he's kind of an atheist intellectual, but he put Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson's kind of all over the place when he's asked about God and Jesus and all that. And so this atheist said, Jordan, if there was a camera pointed at Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and 3 days after Jesus was put in there, and there's a monitor where you can watch what happens, what do you think happens? Do you think Jesus goes walking out of that tomb? And Jordan Peterson goes, yes, I believe we would see Jesus walk out of the tomb. So Jordan Peterson is admitting to saying, I believe that the resurrection happened. But there's one more step that he has, and I would probably argue the same for you, is there's faith that it happened, and then there's putting the faith in that it happened for you. And so that's the difference, to where it's one thing to say, hey, I have faith that that's a chair. And if that's a chair, and, presumably if I sit on it, it'll keep me up. The difference is walking over there and starting to put your weight down and having faith in the fact that it's a chair that will keep you up. And so that's the difference for people, that, faith that Jesus rose from the dead, but then faith in the fact that whenever he did that, when he died on a cross, that it counted for you. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah. That's a very articulate way of putting it. More importantly, breaks it down into in and that. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something I can actually put in my tool bag going forward, and saying, when I am experiencing things in that, like, how does that reference to me in that sort of construct? Absolutely. Well said.
Okay.
Well
Very
said.
good. Well, that's the rock in your shoe. That's going to bother you and keep you up late at night. So you're welcome. But here we are, a half hour into this. Let's get into your personal motto. And your personal motto is life is long.
Yes, sir.
But Donnie, you almost died when you were in your 30s because you had a heart attack. And for a lot of people that survive a heart attack, that becomes a moment in their life to where it's like, oh crap, I let myself go. I'm super fat and I almost died. I got a second chance at life. Other people like, oh shoot, I didn't know I had this genetic condition. I didn't know this and that. And then now they're aware of it. But it was kind of different for you, but it still had the same impact. You're in your 30s, you have a heart attack. It's life reevaluation time. Let's pull out the clipboard. Let's erase and start over. So talk to me about how, your personal motto is life is long, but yours was almost cut short.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so I was 37, and I was in great health. I was training for a super jungle ultra marathon down in Peru, 245K. Don't smoke, don't drink, did everything right. Um, Led by example, was a role model to my kids. And one day after going to my son's spelling bee, I just started feeling pains in my chest. So this is going to be a message to all the men that are listening to this, as well as women. I had a pain that was not something familiar. I had just returned from Alaska and I felt maybe like, I was just getting used to the elevation back in Colorado, and I ignored it. I took that rock, as you just put, that's in my shoe, and I ignored it and I pushed it off to the side. And I kept having this pain all throughout the day in these kind of different intervals. Later on that night, I woke up as if somebody had poured a bag of, or a bucket of hot coals on my chest, and it was burning a hole. Something was wrong. Put some baby aspirin in my mouth, got to the hospital, and the doctor said you had a heart attack. And I kind of had a polite conversation with the doctor. I'm like, look, I'm going to be honest with you, doc. I'm 37. I'm in great physical health. I've delivered babies. I've been in combat environments. I've run from bears. I didn't have a heart attack, and he's like, well, let me be honest with you. I've been doing this for 40 some years. You had a heart attack. I'm like, all right, you got me on this one, doc. I'm going to let you have it. And, yeah, lo and behold, I had what's called a widowmaker heart attack. I had a 99% blockage in my left anterior descending artery, and it ruptured. And it wasn't the only IED, I guess you could say, that I've experienced in my life, but
Yeah.
it ruptured, and they put a stent into my heart, and then I was on the road to recovery. I mean, it was kind of happened one day, and then 2 days later, I was being wheeled out of a hospital in a wheelchair, getting back into my car and driving home. And at that point, I started to realize that the things that I had done were all good. And I'm sure there's things that, I could have done that were different. You know what I mean? You start to question a lot of those things. But what I quickly realized from then until this, post experience, that my life prior to was always in a hurry. I was always in a hurry to do this or to get this done or to experience this. And I never just took a step back and slowed down, because the mentality is life is short. You have to get it going. You have to just go nonstop. And I started to think, well, life really isn't short. Despite coming out of a heart attack and almost dying, life is long. We really don't know when we are going to pass on to that next world. That is the common denominator in all of us, taxes, and then ultimately succumbing to old age or failure of the organs. But I'm like, you should start to slow down. You should take an evaluation of your life. You should find the values. You should find the things that give you peace, give you motivation, and stick with those and cut everything else out. That's personal relationships. That's all the things, and I use a value statement. If it doesn't bring you a form of value, get rid of it. If it's a personal relationship, if it's a habit, if it's some sort of mentality, you get rid of it. And I did this reevaluation, and I did this out in the bush. I moved out into the bush, and I stayed out there for about 6 months in a couple different caves. And I would come back and forth to see my kids and my wife at the time. And it was the time when I actually kind of reevaluated everything. I wrote my first book called Scavenger, and I realized this was the best thing and the worst thing that could happen to me. The best thing being that I could be the example. If you live a life of fitness and you are on top of your game, it could still happen to you. And why it happened to me was just genetics. That was it. I have real sticky blood, and the cholesterol in my blood sticks more than average. And that's okay. Now what you do with this is educate and inform and be that example. If you are smoking 2 packs of cigarettes and you eat McDonald's every day, your probability increases if mine actually took place and happened. So it formed my perception of life as long, where I need to slow down. I need to start enjoying the nuances and the beauties of life, whether it is my son playing in a lacrosse game, or us out for a hunt, or we're building something together, my time with my woman, and just maybe we're just sitting and enjoying each other's presence and company, not even speaking. It's the life is long mentality that gives you a truly fruitful and long life. Not saying that, God, I got to do this today or I got to do this tomorrow. And don't get me wrong, we do have those tasks. Got to pick my kids up. I got to maybe get some groceries. But I want people to understand that if you have a goal or you have an objective, or you have something you're looking forward to, don't be in a rush to sacrifice yourself to get to that objective. Understand that things take time. Things take a couple breaths. It takes a couple days, even to a year's. And the journey of that life being long is the biggest reward while you're alive on this current plane. So you should take the time, accept that, and not be in a rush to achieve everything and do everything, because you can't take it with you. You're going to go to the place that you want to go, and you're going to live the best life there is after that. So enjoy this one, accept that you will die one day. That is a guarantee we all have. Mm-hmm. So live this life in the aspect of serving, and the aspect of loving and communing with your family, your neighbors. Be a leader by example and enjoy the longevity of it, because you never really know. And my mentality is, once you've had one heart attack, it's very likely you'll have a second one. So I kind of got a leg up on pretty much everybody else out there. I know one day I'll probably have one more, and that could be it. That could be my mentality, and say, okay, that's what's going to get you 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Or I could say, yep, that could happen. But all the things that I do now, I'm not going to know when that day comes. So as long as I just take a step back, breathe, enjoy the beauty that is life, life will be long, and I'm not rushing through it to get to the end.
Donnie, are you impatient by nature?
At one point I was. That was the military. Okay. Yeah, all the military taught me
that. That's what I would have guessed. So I am very impatient by nature. And so I used to do hobbies that had instant gratification, right? And so, I talk about this all the time. So, I used to play, because I was a baseball player. And so when you're an adult, you don't get to play baseball really. So you play slow pitch beer league softball, but you still get that immediate gratification of the hit or the home run or the play or the outfield assist or whatever. And then I started doing jujitsu at the age of 30.
There you go.
Which you can't just be an athlete and be good at jujitsu. It doesn't work that way, right? You could have never played softball before and go out there and maybe be able to do a few things, but with jujitsu, it just doesn't work that way. And so if you keep that impatient mindset, you will eventually quit, because you're going to look at yourself and you're going to be like, I'm not getting any better. This sucks. I'm just getting killed every single day. I got other things to do with my time. I'm too important to keep doing this hard task all the time. Yeah. And so that's why I encourage people to do jujitsu, because as you progress, I've trained for a little over 7 years. I can look back on who I was at the beginning and who I've been able to mold myself into, but it's an iceberg, man, that just moves slowly across the plane. Like, I'm thinking Ice Age, where there's just a slow spread. It's lava that's just creeping over the earth. Like, it's just this slow process. And if you try to speed it up, you will actually do yourself a disservice. And so that's what I think it's very interesting for you, that you've kind of embraced this more patient mindset, even though it doesn't, necessarily align with your wiring. And so you go from that, you have this situation where your life almost ends, you're given this new perspective. And then somewhere along the line, you become a professional caveman. And so you're going to have to kind of explain that to us well-adjusted normal people that aren't surrounded by dead animal skins. Where did that happen? So it's like, obviously as a Marine, you're being taught survivalist things, but most Marines don't turn survivalism or teaching the general populace survivalist behaviors. They don't turn that into a career. But for you, it kind of became who you were. You became obsessed with this idea of survivalism, and then it turned into, okay, how do I teach other people how to do these same things that I've learned, these primitive skill sets, even if you're using modern tools. So how in the world do you become that?
Yeah, I really think it comes from kind of that evaluation of life and saying, as we have everything we could possibly need in this world, food, just everything exists. Everything you see around you exists, and it's really at our fingertips. Where can I go that those things don't exist? Where can I go where I have to work for every single thing that I do, to make a fire, to get some food, to get some clean water? And that natural environment allows you to reset. And for me, that reset environment, probably like for many of your listeners here, we grew up without YouTube and all these sort of influences out in the world. We spent our time outside. We spent our outside shooting BB guns or 22s and building forts and trapping animals. Like, that's just kind of how we grew up. And from that early age, there was a peace there. There wasn't an acceptance there. There was a joy there. And through that young age into the military, which reinforced a lot of my skills, as well as gave me a mental game that said, no matter what you do in the civilian life, your hardest day will never be compared to some of the hardest days you'll experience in the military, whether it's combat or sleeping in the rain. So it gave me something to kind of hold on to, which built my resiliency. And then after that heart attack, it was that reevaluation says, well, what do you really enjoy? What brings you peace? What brings you a whole different aspect of enjoyment in life? And it was the natural world. And I wanted to go about it in a way where less was more. Because in a world of everything that you could possibly need, you have at your fingertips. Where can I go where there's less? Where can I go where I have to actually figure out how to make a stone knife or make a blade to cut up, a deer and a fireboard and build a shelter? That's going to give me perspective, more importantly, appreciation into the things that do exist when I'm at home or with my loved ones. So for me, it was thinking to folks like, we all kind of grew up in the outdoors and we kind of have an origin story in our use around it. We should try to get people back to it, because as technology slowly comes into this whole new form between AI and all this sort of stuff, we could kind of lose that connection to the natural world. And the best way to understand it is to go live in it, to actually go experience it. And a hike is good. A hunting trip is even better. But how do you actually go, not just survive? Because survival is just getting by. Thriving is that level that you aim to. Thriving is where you can have peace. You can have comfort. You have that safety. You have that security. So I wanted to survive, but then ultimately I wanted to thrive. And it was something where I believe that people wanted to reconnect with. They wanted to kind of reevaluate their own kind of personal life in that kind of modern world and see how they can kind of reconnect to that natural world. And for me, it was a process of kind of starting off at the very beginning. And one of the things that I found a complete fascination with was things like stone tools, stone knives and arrow points and arrowheads. And that was the determining factor in a lot of my pursuits going to this day, where I can take a raw piece of stone like this and then turn it into a knife like this that I could use for any manner of tasks. And for me, that was that kind of determining factor. That was the golden nugget, if you will. And I wanted to really deep dive into that and start teaching people. So how does a guy that's coming out of the military that doesn't really enjoy, technology, didn't even have social media at the time, how does he do this? You go find a trailhead, you go find a parking lot where people congregate to go to the outdoors. You roll out a bison hide, you do a hand drill, friction fire, nap some tools, do a little elevator pitch, print out 50 business cards, and try to start, impacting people where you can bring them out there and experience the outdoors.
That's awesome. And so you drove home the point of how you kind of got started with all this, but in order to get to where you are now and in order to be on that journey, you had to do a lot of these things yourself, and you had to basically put yourself in a lot of sketchy situations. And so here's the thing. You've talked a lot about this on some of your shows that you've been on and some of your own personal things that you've done. So what are some of the extra sketchy situations that you've been a part of? I want to hear some of those stories, but also I have a request. I want you to tell us something that you haven't said anywhere else. I want there's that story that you haven't shared on a TV show before or a podcast before, but there's one that as soon as I said that, I know it popped up in the back of your brain. What's that story that you hadn't told before that only my audience is going to get because they stayed with us this long? So let's go.
All right. So there's been a lot of sketchy situations, but I'll give you one that's happened even as of recently. And that was last summer out in the deserts of Utah. I almost died. And I thought I genuinely was going to die. I was scouting a location for a fellow individual who teaches a lot of younger kids. It was a 16-mile long canyon. He asked me if I would go out and scout for water. And I'd been to this canyon, so I knew there was water in a couple different areas, but I wanted to make sure before you get some teenagers down in there. So I walked down into this canyon, and there's a lot of slick rock, and you're kind of sliding down rock and going through these spider holes and shimmying across stuff. Eventually, I get to the bottom of the canyon. There's no water. So water has a natural property. It typically flows downhill, and it will pool and collect. So I start walking down the canyon. Eventually, I get to the base of it, and there's no water. And I'm like, this is bad. More importantly, I have one water bottle with me. Ego was kind of getting in the way. I'm like, I got to get out of the canyon. The only way to get out is to walk back up. So I turn around and walk all the way back up, and I have not had water for probably 3 or 4 hours. And, I'm a larger guy. I'm 6'3" and, 235, 240 pounds. And, it was starting to take a toll on me. But when I got out of the canyon's at a little bit lower kind of elevation. It's cooler. I got to the rim and the sun started to bake me and I started to black out. And I had about 3.5 miles before I got to my truck. And as I'm walking, I'm just getting tunnel vision. I'm dry heaving. My pulse is racing and has a heart attack, survivor, if you want to use that term. I knew this wasn't good. So I had to sit down, take a break, and I had to turn on this mental switch from the military and all my loved ones saying, get up, you have to do this. Otherwise, you're going to cook and bake out here and crows are going to be eating your eyes in about 24 hours. So I found little accomplishments. I found little pieces of terrain that offered some shade, and I would move from shade to shade to shade over a series of, 3+ miles over about, an hour and a half to about 2 hours, dry heaving, cramping, vomiting the entire way till I was about an hour away from my car and, or about a mile away from my car. And I thought this was it. My body had completely seized up. I could not move my legs. And there was just something that kind of spoke to me that was like, you have no other options, my dude. Get up and just go. So I took every bit of last, strength and effort and energy and just trudged through with this tunnel vision coming in and out. Eventually got to my truck, drank a half a bottle of Gatorade that was lukewarm, threw it up because you don't want to chug something when you're dehydrated. Yep. You want to slowly slip, and turned on my car, sat in the AC, eventually got my body to a composed state, and then had to drive myself out and start rehydrating. But it was that sort of thing where, I kid you not, I've had various brushes with death, but that was one time where I honestly thought this could be it. This guy who's does all these survival things and teaches this, that, and the other, but he brings one bottle of water with him. Yeah. Go into a canyon all day long, and almost almost died. But something that I guess your listeners.
Let's go.
Kyle's
first time you heard it here first, guys. Let's go.
All right. So one of the things that I preach in a lot of videos is in a lot of public things is kind of to know more and carry less. And when it comes to flint napping, I'm always kind of talking about safety. And a lot of people ask me about safety sort of stuff. Do you wear gloves? Do you wear leg pads? And one day I was working on a giant piece of obsidian, which is volcanic glass, and it's razor sharp.
Right.
And while this was going on, I was doing some pressure flaking, a couple different techniques. And when I went through this, and as somebody who's dedicated much of his life to flint napping, this is kind of a really bad mistake. But as I was pressure flaking, my pressure flaker slipped off the obsidian, and I drove the top of my thumb right through the obsidian, slicing off a pretty sizable chunk. And when I sliced off that chunk, and you can kind of see the scar on my thumb, I had this huge panic attack, and I kind of didn't shut down, but I was like, oh my God, I just did the one thing I preach continuously to people, to have safety, to be this. More importantly, I was hyper focused on that cut that I was starting to not fully bleed out, but there was a large pool of blood, and I kind of went into this shock mode. And I've seen, burning bodies and explosions and all sorts of chaos, but on my own thumb, I kind of tweaked out and just kind of lost complete composure and was looking at it as it was bleeding out all over the place. And I started to get lightheaded, and I started to kind of go into this fainting mode until I was able to put my hand over the top, and I was able to actually cauterize the wound through a chemical process. But I never share this with anybody, and I can't believe I'm sharing this with you because I am the ultimate practitioner when it comes to flint napping, that safety is important and that you should always be prepared. More importantly, you should have first aid. And I feel like through my own negligence and through my own, it will never happen to me. It did happen to me. And the result was a serious, serious wound on my hand where I couldn't actually flint nap. And the whole aspect of this that I will never really admit to anybody else is that I use primitive tools. I use antler and I use bone to do this. Because of this happening, I had to transition into a modern tool set, and I do not use modern tools, but there was about a 3-month recovery window where I was using modern tools to produce my projectiles and my points because they're just easier to manipulate. But it doesn't sound very exciting. But for somebody who's like dedicated their entire life to using a very primitive way of making stone tools and having the dumbest accident you could possibly imagine with the sharpest substance on earth, it's just, it's embarrassing for me. And it's not like, that exciting, but I feel embarrassed. It's like, I can't believe I just told that to everyone here.
Hey, well, let me hop in here to assuage some of that embarrassment, because what you just displayed, Donnie, is putting your ego aside for the betterment of the longevity of your project, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because there are people, right? Because if this happened 1,000 years ago, you get gangrene and you die probably, right? And like this is a major issue. And so it's like, okay, you use primitive tools, but you'll use modern medicine. And so it's like, there's always this inconsistency of how we're doing things. And I have a, a thought here that probably no one's going to hold that against you, that you're using some modern tools to make things that have all that. And so just relax, take a deep breath. And here's the thing. We're going to take away a little bit more of that anxiety, because now we're going to get into some rapid fire questions, because as we wind to a close here, I have a bunch of survivalist type questions that we can kind of treat like a lightning round, because I think this will cover a lot of ground in a short period of time and give guys a lot of nuggets to walk away from a conversation that's already been fired. So let's get into a couple of these questions here. Okay. First one I have.
Yeah.
What is the bigger problem? People overestimating their survivalist abilities, or people not preparing to survive at all? What is the bigger problem?
I think it's the overestimation of our abilities. A lot of us, like I said, we grew up hunting, fishing, and camping and all these things, but it doesn't mean if all of those resources are removed, you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to address your needs, wants, and desires in that true survival situation. It is better to know more and carry less. But if you're in that novice stage, you should supply yourself. So we have to kind of put our ego aside. We can all be big, hunking, hurley, oil rig field workers and iron workers, but the environment is a harsh place. It will not lie, cheat, or steal from you. It is the ultimate truth in this natural living world, and it will take from you very quick.
I think you're absolutely right. That's what I would have guessed you would have said, because we talked about this off air, but it's like there are people that don't know how to fight, but they just assume if they're in a situation that's going to get kinetic, that all of a sudden they're just going to know how to use that carbine. They're just going to know how to take someone down and hold them there until help arrives. And it's like, no, you're actually going to fall to the level of your training. And especially in a survivalist scenario, you don't want to just pretend. All right. So next question here. Or go ahead, Donnie. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I have an actual story that goes into that example perfectly. Yeah. I'm in Golden, Colorado. I'm walking in a park with my fiance and her parents, and it's a loaded park, and a fight breaks out. Well, not really a fight, but a brawl breaks out between homeless guys. One smashes a bottle, flashes a guy across the face. He's got a huge gouge across his face, and everyone in the audience starts looking. My girlfriend goes, my fiance goes, hey, stop. And I'm already mid-run over there. I tackle this guy, put him in like a rear naked choke, bring him to the ground, chicken wing both of his arms, and people start, first thing they do is pull out their phones and they start calling the cops and then filming. And for about 25, probably less than 25, maybe we're closer to 20 minutes, I sat there and I held that guy with just my body pressure and just, obviously manipulation of the arms, until the cops came, and for whatever reason, they handcuffed me and put me in cuffs because they thought I was the perpetrator of this.
Yeah. Everyone
kind of displayed it out. But it's one of those things. I don't consider myself a fighter. I consider myself to have certain knowledge, skills, and abilities in fighting, and that was kind of the limit to my ability to kind of thwart this from continuing on into, ultimately being a bloody mess. A little bit of a background, but not a proficiency. So if anyone going into that survival world, you might have a little bit of background, but what is your level of proficiency in those kind of austere environments to really get you out on top?
Very good. All right. Next question here. Let's get to the basics. What are some of the most basic skills someone needs in order to survive in the outdoors? What are some of the basic building blocks?
I think one of the most important things that people need, one is an aspect of creativity. We got to have a creative process. That is our number one survival skill, because even with very few resources, you can be creative to solve problems. And really that main problem is understanding how to shelter. And that's macro as well as micro shelter. Exposure to the elements will kill you fast in extreme heats, extreme cold, when you're wet, when you're tired. the exposure to the elements will kill you quicker than not having food. So being able to build something or understand how to protect yourself from that environment will keep you alive a whole heck of a lot longer. From there, it's understanding the dynamic between fire and water. They go hand in hand. Fire heats, warms, signals, and cooks. Water hydrates and keeps you alive. But sometimes you need fire to potentially process water. So it's understanding the environments will dictate what your priorities will be that will ultimately keep you alive. But I cannot tell you how important it is to understand how to build a shelter on the large scale to keep you safe, protected, and warm, as well as understanding what clothing you can wear that is your micro shelter, if you will, to keep you alive, ready, and willing to go forward out in a survival situation.
Okay, very good. So those are the basics. Let's move from surviving, basic survival, to thriving. You really talk about thriving a lot. How does someone thrive in the natural world?
Yeah, thriving is that aspect when you've moved beyond just getting by, hand to mouth. Thriving is the comfort, the security, as well as the ease of survival. Knowing that you have a supply of food, knowing you have a supply of firewood, that the shelter that you're living in is safe and secure from the elements, bears, moose, mountain lion, whatever that case may be. And how you get from survival to thrival, there is no defined way. There is no to say, I've done these 5 things, now I'm thriving. It's a mentality, and more importantly, it's addressing your needs over a long term. And if you find yourself with all of those needs met and your mentality is straightforward and you feel like you want to sit in the sun for 45 minutes, you're starting to get into that thrival zone where you're not worried about, will I have enough food? Will I have enough water? Will I be safe tonight? You're moving into that zone of, now I can start thinking about comfort. I can start thinking about things that might give me enjoyment, where I could sit and read a book if I had one. Or I'm going to sit and carve a stick that serves no purpose except for the enjoyment of it. So there is no defined way what is thriving, what is that kind of characteristics or those 4 or 5 steps you need. It's the mentality as well as addressing all of your needs. But it's hard to address your needs all the time.
Very good. All right, next one here. What are some of the biggest misnomers and misconceptions about what someone should do in a survival situation? And I'll use an example from you. So I've heard it said before that if we're dehydrated, that we should drink our own urine, but I've seen where you've said that's a terrible idea. So what are some of those misnomers, misconceptions that are really, really popular? Yeah.
So drinking your own urine, do not do it. It's a toxic element. If anything, if you are going to employ urine, pee on some clothing and then wrap it around you, because it will create an aspect of moisture, and that's better than actually consuming it. Moss doesn't grow on a certain side of the tree. You can go into some forest and find moss growing 360 degrees all the way around it. Some of the other things are that there is a difference between purification and filtering. If you filter water, it does not mean that it's purified. Filtering means you are removing particulates. Purification means you are killing all of the cryptosporidium and the bacteria and all the things that could live and exist and cause you harm on the inside. We need to understand those differences, and the easiest way to purify water is to simply boil it at 212 degrees. How do you know you're there? The water's boiling. That's your perfect indication. Some of the other misnomers are, I guess you could say, when it comes to building shelter, there is no specific best shelter for any environment. Every duration of time, the equipment, the resources that you have will dictate what sort of shelter you will build. There is no, when I go into the jungle, this is the shelter I'm building. Again, creativity and understanding the resources and the environment that you're in will ultimately dictate the sort of shelter that you're going into. Another misnomer, as well as you might know the stars, I would not navigate off of them. The stars are a very unique tool to use, but it takes a very complex and in-depth understanding of the season, the time, the year, and where those stars are aligned for you to use them as a navigation aid. Some stars will exist in the routine patterns of where they are, but it can be very confusing, especially this day and age with satellites and all this artificial light that exists. Stars can get drowned out. You'll be good to go. And the last one I'll add is this. Typically in North America, within 8 to 10 miles, no matter where you're at in North America, you can find a road. So That road doesn't mean a hardball road where it's traffic. It could be a fire cut. It could be a forest road or a fire actual road, but you can come across a road. So to get really remote, you can get there, but the feasibility and the probability of you finding a road to ultimately get yourself out and come across somebody else is extremely high. So keep that in mind, that you could be out in the bush in the middle of nowhere, but I can guarantee you there's some sort of road close by.
All right. That's all very, very good stuff. A couple of more questions here. So
Yes, sir.
let's talk about some essentials. What are some essentials that we should all carry in our vehicles?
Yeah, vehicles. I mean, number one is your own personal extraction device. I mean, come-alongs, any sort of like heavy gauge winches, as well as straps to pull yourself out, from a fence post or a tree, whatever the case may be. But it's always kind of like having your own self-protection to remove yourself out of it. With that is the necessary kind of reflective gear that you could use to signal other drivers that you are under arrest, or something that gives them warning, especially at night. Within that, I always go vehicle maintenance is extremely important. The necessary tools that you could do to overcome kind of simple problems, a flat tire, running out of gas, anything that could go wrong in your vehicle. I mean, you might not be able to address everything, but some of those simple tasks and problems would be smart. With that is a bag for you to leave your vehicle. Everyone wants to stay close to their vehicle, and I don't recommend it based on the environment, but you have to have a bag where you have to say, I need to walk from here to the gas station I saw 20 miles ago. And in that bag, you want to have a change of clothing that's weather appropriate, signaling devices, cash, a good map or two of your local area where you're traveling, as well as the necessary footwear that you can do it. As much as everyone wants to kind of be the gray man and go dark and all this sort of stuff, but if I see somebody walking along the road and they're wearing an orange vest and I'm in a remote area, they've got a backpack on, they look somewhat clean and professional, I'm more likely to stop compared to somebody that's wearing all black, trying to be indiscreet because they read some blog about you have to be this, you have to be that in this sort of situation. No. Be presentable and you're more likely to get picked up. But personal aid, self-aid, that first aid as well. And then all the things that you could wind up using necessary to your family. If you have a family dynamic with young kids, a wife, sons, what things will they need? And you should supply it with food, snacks, water in case you are sitting on the side of the road for an hour or even a day. I would go as far as even say throw in a coloring book or a word search to keep those young ones potentially occupied. But it's addressing the needs of everybody that routinely travels in that vehicle.
All right, so that's the vehicle. But last question of the day here. What are some essentials that we should all carry on our person? So, and we'll split that to when you're just in your normal everyday life, but also if you're going to be out in any type of a, nature situation.
Yeah. So I think for me in that everyday life, or sometimes referred to as your EDC, your everyday carry, I think a good blade is to have. Whether you're cutting out of a seatbelt or you're opening up a package, and if you are well versed in certain self-defense things with the blade, I mean, just remember your adversary could take that blade and use it against you. But for those general purposes of cutting, I don't think that's wrong. I usually carry a butt pack, and in that butt pack, I always have a blade, and I have a little micro flashlight. Just for turning on and looking here and there. It's going to give me a little bit light. Also, it's a signaling device in times of duress. Carry a little aspect of cordage, not to be building snares or traps, but in case a shoelace breaks or I got to quickly bind something down and I just don't have something readily available. And then within there, I always carry a couple Band-Aids and some Tylenol, something that I can give myself a little bit of relief in the event of a minor injury and, some sort of mental pain, something in that capacity. It's very, very minimal in the modern world and that civilian world. You can come across those resources readily available, if you need them, but it's always nice to have, but a knife and a good little flashlight, you can't go wrong. But this is shooter preference. Anyone that shoots has their preference. I'm a less is more, but that's my thing. Out in the bush, if you're going out for, let's just use a day hike scenario, or you're going out hunting for the weekend, I would definitely have something that you can address yourself in a form of shelter. That can be a bivy bag or a small little micro tarp. And within the structure of that tarp or that bivy bag, make sure it has some signaling capabilities. It's orange, it's reflective, and it holds in your body heat pretty well. A form of fire, I usually like to carry a ferro rod, because it's waterproof and it's not going to break, or you can carry some matches and a lighter, but something that will aid in your ability to make fire. I like to carry some sort of cutting tool. I like to use typically like a Leatherman, something with a little bit more cutting capability with multi-use that could also be translated into that kind of everyday carry as well. I also like to carry a little bit more cordage, and I also like to carry something kind of sweet, if you will, like a little sugary thing, like a lifesaver or a little packet of honey that if I am getting kind of down on my luck, and the hiking backpack that I was wearing on this day hike, and I accidentally lost it or fell into a river or stream and I dropped it, I still have a little bit of resource on the inside, something that will address my needs of tooling in the form of cutting, shelter, cordage, a little bit of sugar, and last but not least is a form that's going to allow me to process water quickly. And the best rule of form for that is an iodine tablet or some sort of little plastic bag that I could throw some iodine tablets in, scoop up some dirty water, know that it's safe to drink, and be able to drink it. So it's kind of going back into that fire, food, shelter, water, signaling. You really can't go wrong. But again, shooter preference based off your environment. But more importantly, it's based off your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. All three uniquely different things that will give you a lot of different perspective and how you can go put your ego aside and really go out into the outdoors and address those survival situations if they become present.
Boom, Donnie, that is exactly what I was expecting from you. That is a fire last 20 minutes of this. We only went a little bit further than we thought we did, but man, we weaved in and out of a lot of different things here. I really, really appreciate your time and attention and creativity in our interview today, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, first and foremost, I appreciate everyone listening. Keep that mental positivity going forward. Lead by example. And remember, sometimes, even though we might be older, we are still the future and how we impact those people that are older than us as well as young as us. And I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much. Kyle, thank you. Right. And I wish you the best.
Donnie, I appreciate you coming on. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Donny Dust. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. The only link I've got for you today, we're keeping it simple. It's a link to Donnie's website. Go there and check it out. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.